Brand new day, it's a brand new week. It's Monday, it's the 24th of January. I just realized my clock is turned off. It's like, I thought I was totally ready to go and there's no clock. So now there's a clock. I have a big clock because I need to know, whether it's time to eat. It's very important. It's exactly 9 o'clock. It's the 24th of January, 2022. Welcome to Backchannel. If you've been with the channel already this morning, then we continue the conversation. Lots to talk about here. We're going to look at the news and look at some of the things happening around the US. And we're also going to look at some rather specific subjects regarding the manatee feeding experiment that's happening in Florida, Trump withdrawing the US from the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. We'll talk about the TPPA and take a look at what it is. It's also tax filing season, so we'll explain what you need to do. And of course, all your life hacks in regards to this are completely welcome. And the Beach Boys' Brian Wilson turns 80 this year. He's going to star in a new documentary in the cinema called Long Promised Road. We'll take a look at his amazing life as well. So all that to come. You can message the show. You just say your name. You just say the word, whatever your wake-up word is, then say, and then your message. If you've never done it before, you'll need to say your name. But if you have done it before with your Echo show, it will remember your name. It's very clever. And then there's also the chat facility. You just go to backchannel.tv and you can type your message there. And you're very welcome to follow the show on YouTube as well, because we're live streaming. So let's jump straight into the morning papers before we start talking about the manatee feeding experiment. The New York Times for this Monday morning leads with wins marred by missteps, Biden's first pandemic year. Erratic virus spurred confusing messaging and politics often stymied action. Yes, lots of criticism of Rochelle Walensky, who is the CDC boss, who has tried to be a little bit more open and free-flowing with her information from the previous lot. And it's been confusing because it seems like they seem to change message every month. She's been working from her home outside Boston on a Friday night, late July. The director of the CDC has just learned from members of her staff that vaccinated Americans were spreading coronavirus. Vaccines had been the core of Biden's pandemic strategy from the moment he took office. But as Dr. Walensky was briefed about a cluster of breakthrough cases in Provincetown, the reality sank in. Yeah, I mean, this is part of the problem, isn't it? When you have a virus that is mutating, you end up not really knowing how to handle it, because the messaging has to change all the time. So obviously the rules for Delta are different to the rules for Omicron, but some people who are not interested in the virus don't take any interest in the fact that it's an evolving, mutating, re-establishing thing. They just think, well, the CDC is changing their minds all the time. And it's like, no, the virus is changing its mind all the time. The CDC is just responding. It's interesting. Also on the front of the New York Times, US weighs troop deployment of thousands to Eastern Europe. Yes, Biden is now having to go to war. I mean, it's like, it couldn't get any more difficult for this poor guy. He's like 106 years of age, and he's having to handle all of this extra stuff. He really didn't think that this was going to be something that would be on his plate. But unfortunately, as we know, relations between Trump, Russia, and the Ukraine were somewhat questionable. You may remember that Trump asked Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, to try and investigate Hunter Biden's laptop. Do you remember that story? Yeah, that was the perfect phone call that got him impeached the first time, because he was impeached twice. It's almost like an impeachment used to be like this big thing. It's an impeachment. And like, Clinton and Nixon. But now, we have a twice impeached president who basically got let off in the Senate both times. And so impeachment seems to have lost its value now, doesn't it? Also, obsolete bulbs fill shelves at dollar store. Oh, that's interesting. For years, Deborah Turner bought her light bulbs at one of the many dollar stores that serve her neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio. But the bulbs for sale were highly efficient, shorter lasting, incandescent ones. Highly inefficient. Yeah, I'm not used to saying the word inefficient. I didn't think we did that anymore, but apparently we do. The pearl-shaped orbs with glowing wire centers, meaning that over time, Mrs. Turner, who lives in a neighborhood where a quarter of the residents are below the poverty line, would spend hundreds of dollars more on electrical bills because of the extra power they use than if she'd purchased any energy-saving LED lights. It's a pattern repeated nationwide. Research has shown that lower-end retailers like dollar stores or convenience shops still extensively stock their shelves with traditional or halogen incandescent bulbs, even as stores serving more affluent communities have shifted to selling far more efficient LEDs. I mean, this is just like this is like capitalism personified, isn't it? You know, like the world has moved on. The wealthy are using a light bulb that lasts 10 years, and the poor are using a light bulb that lasts 1 year. Isn't that tragic? And probably paying more for it. Because, you know, the LED bulbs that last 10 years, they now only cost $1 or $2. So, I mean, I literally couldn't imagine having an incandescent bulb in my house. I would just feel like an idiot. Maybe you've switched over. I mean, here's an interesting thing. Donald Trump hated LED lights. He said they made him look orange. And I think you'll find that actually that was probably his makeup that made him look orange. But he actually put a law in place to get rid of LED bulbs and bring back incandescent bulbs. Yeah, he did. Yeah, look it up. He did. And and I believe that obviously a lot of the people that follow Trump are poor. And they probably listened to what he had to say about bulbs being, you know, terrible. And they were like, yeah, I'm not buying LED bulbs. LED bulbs are for like libtard snowflakes. I want a good old-fashioned light bulb. I bet that's what happened. I bet that people that trusted Trump agreed that the old bulb was a better bulb. I mean, look, here's a caveat. The very early LED bulbs didn't have a good light. But the technology changed. Now they're dimmable, and now they're available. They're even available with a fake filament inside, so it actually looks like an incandescent bulb. Have you found the law? He did it. I'm telling you, he did it. He banned LED light bulbs and to bring back the sale of incandescent bulbs. Amazing. Poor nations lose their best nurses to the rich. This is a story out of Zambia. It says there's few nurses in the Zambian capital with the skills and experience that Alex Mulumba, who works in the operating room at a critical care hospital, but he's recently learned that through a barrage of social media posts and LinkedIn solicitations, many faraway places are eager for his expertise too. And they'll pay him far more than the $415 a month, including an $8 health risk bonus that he earns now. So he's considering his options. Canada, where friends of his have migrated and quickly found work. He says you have to build something with your life. Sorry, I sneezed. Whew. It says Canada is among numerous wealthy nations, including the United States and United Kingdom, that are aggressively recruiting medical workers from the developing world to replenish a healthcare workforce drastically depleted by the COVID-19 pandemic. The urgency and strong pull from the high-income nations, including countries like Germany and Finland, which had not previously recruited health workers from abroad, has upended migration patterns and raised new questions about the ethics of recruitment from countries with weak health systems during a pandemic. That's so interesting, isn't it? Where I'm from in England, we recruit a lot of nursing staff from Europe and Africa and, I mean, basically anywhere because it's just so desperate, right? Yeah. And, yeah, the Caribbean, the Southeast Asia, I mean, you know, anyone and everyone. Bring them in. And we pay them, you know, more than they'd get where they come from, obviously. And so I'm very used to living amongst a kind of socialized healthcare system where you have a nursing staff of all varieties. And one thing I find consistent with like British healthcare is that the nursing is actually very consistent, even though that people are from all these different places. The training to be a National Health Service nurse, like, the conversion course, or however many weeks they have to do before they can work for the National Health Service. Because, a lot of these international qualifications are not transferable, so they need to be transferred. And the National Health Service in England has really got that down. They can bring people in very quickly and have them work on the wards very quickly. And the quality of the nursing is excellent and very consistent. The only problem is, and increasingly in recent years, there's just not enough of them. And so you used to have like 3 or 4 nurses. Well, say one patient would have at least 1 or 2 nurses that they would recognize looking after them, and now it's like less than 1. It's like you have less than 1 nurse each now. Oh, that's right. Yes, Boris Johnson gave the nurses in England a 1p pay rise, like the equivalent of less than a cent. Yeah, it's so offensive. Yeah. Yeah, he did that kind of applause for the nurses every week, didn't he? Like every Friday, everyone was coming out and clapping the nursing staff, including the Prime Minister, who probably won't be the Prime Minister for very long after today's revelations. You hear this new one this morning about the person that was supposed to be like investigating COVID fraud in government because he'd handed out all of these contracts to friends of his that were going to, create PPE, bringing in like masks and gowns, stuff they'd never done before. Like they'd never had that job before. And all of a sudden they realized they could be the middleman between. And so the guy who was supposed to be investigating it as part of the government has quit. He's like, this is so bad, I'm leaving. I don't want to be involved in this. And so, if Boris Johnson hadn't had a bad enough 2 weeks, because of course his premiership's been hanging by a thread, this story this morning is probably going to finish him off. Or potentially, he'll just live to see another election. That's unfortunately the kind of guy he is. Nothing sticks to him. It's the problem with being so dynamic and charismatic, is that it just goes to show, doesn't it, how it pays to be charismatic. Like, you don't need skills, you don't need to work hard. You can literally be a charismatic buffoon, and people are like, that's our guy. And it was the same with Trump, and it's the same with lots of modern leaders. People are drawn to the clown because politics is so boring. So give us the clown. We'll put up with the negativity because at least we'll be entertained. It's so tragic. It's supposed to be boring. Okay, so that's how the New York Times prepares itself. Although, hang on, let me just do this story about the Olympians. It's very interesting. It says they've come too far for too long to mess it all up now. So the 8 members of the Canadian men's curling team are spending 3 weeks before the Winter Olympics sequestered in a rental home in Vancouver. They train only when the rink nearby is empty and otherwise pass the time shooting pool, sitting in a hot tub, and thinking about their families back home. It's like a frat house without the booze, said Mark Kennedy, a 2010 gold medalist, and an alternate on this year's team who's dealing with the disappointment of missing one of his daughter's dance recitals. Everybody here has pretty wonderful spouses. As thousands of Olympians worldwide collectively hurtle through the final weeks of preparation for the 2022 Games in Beijing, they're integrating a new exercise into their daily regimens, sidestepping COVID-19 by whatever means necessary. Why didn't they just cancel the Olympics? I mean, it just makes no sense to me at all that they would just... It just doesn't make any sense. Yeah, I think the problem is the athletes, isn't it? The athletes need competition, because that's the rhythm of their training. You train, then the 4 years is done, you do the competition, you win, you lose, you train or you quit or whatever. There's a cycle to being an elite athlete. And if you take the competition out of it, then it changes everything, doesn't it? Very interesting. Okay, let's jump on to another newspaper now, because we can. Oh, Jimmy's with us. Hi, Jimmy. Welcome. Nice to know you're here. And Stacey, she can't stay for too long today. Okay, well, when you need to go, you go. You got to go, you got to go, you go when you got to go. When you got to go, you got to go. Okay, Wall Street Journal is next up on the list of newspapers that we're having a quick look through this morning. Brady's latest impossible comeback falls short for Bucks. Yes, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, lost to the Los Angeles Rams on Sunday after clawing back from 27-3, I don't really know how you say it, to tie the game in the fourth quarter before the Rams won with a field goal. What is that? Like a different field? The Kansas City Chiefs beat the Buffalo Bills 42-36 in overtime. Excellent. Good job, lads. Well done, lads. Hong Kong's pandemic. Oh, now I'm back in my comfort zone. Talking about the pandemic in Hong Kong and foreign executives. Now I'm back in my comfort zone. I've never been to Hong Kong, but I feel a certain affinity with it. Maybe it's because it used to be under British rule. I don't know. Hong Kong, it says, stringent rules to keep Hong Kong free of COVID are driving away more foreign executives, chipping away at the city's decades-old status as one of the world's top business hubs. That's interesting, isn't it? But why does anyone need to be anywhere now? I mean, that's the other thing, isn't it? I mean, if you think about that for a second. No one needs to be anywhere. Flight bans, lengthy quarantine stays for arrivals, and repeated school closures are pushing more to a breaking point. As the pandemic enters its third year, the city clings to a zero-COVID strategy abandoned by nearly all countries except for China. A growing outbreak at a public housing estate has prompted the government to lock down buildings and send more people into quarantine. Executives complain the travel restrictions have prevented them from keeping tabs on operations in other countries or visiting business partners and potential clients, even in mainland China. Meanwhile, there is the ever-present risk of being sent to quarantine. I mean, the thing is, we're going to look back on this and we're going to be like, our rules needed to be fluid. Do you see what I mean? Like, the rules need to be fluid. And it's the fluidity of the rules that is what prevents hospitals from becoming full. And that's really the point of this, isn't it? Well, they have been. The rules on mask wearing have been fluid. They have ebbed and flowed. And now that the Omicron is, the dominant strain, and they're now saying cloth masks don't work. And they're now saying wear an N95. I bought a box of 50 KN95s, and I opened one up, I put it on, and it doesn't fit. Pulls my ears right out. But it's agony. It's agony. Like, I can't wear them. And now I've opened the box. Like, what am I going to do? I have to sell them to somebody. Because, of course, they're like gold dust here. I could probably get a couple of $100 for those. You can't get them. Can't get them. You certainly can't get N95s. The government is now here. The federal government is now sending 4 masks to every household. And 4 tests as well to every household if you register. I've registered. I don't know if it's going to arrive or not, but I've registered. It's all that matters. Schools may be open, but they are struggling. Shortage of tests, teachers and students lead to low-grade chaos, it says. Just as we've been saying, schools should be open, pandemic or not, much of the public says, if only they all had what they need to function. Students at New York City's elite Brooklyn Technical High School played hangman in psychology class recently while a substitute sat behind the teacher's desk. They were eager to prepare for a coming midterm exam, the student said, but their usual instructor was out sick again. Everybody's kind of freaking out, said Delia Marcus. We haven't really learned anything. The fast-spreading Omicron variant of COVID-19 has dealt a fresh pandemic blow to Brooklyn Tech, one of the nation's largest high schools, with more than 5,800 students, and among the most competitive, with an admission rate of under 10%. I mean, this is just the way it is. I mean, maybe this is the answer. Maybe we need to stop trying to... Maybe we need to stop trying to kind of squeeze ourselves into a square peg into a round hole. I mean, this is just how it is now. I forgot to put my little light back there. There we go. It's made a world of difference. Maybe this is just the way it is now. Maybe we just need to accept the fact that it's just crap. This life right now during this pandemic is going to be less than perfect. Or crap, as I said earlier. That's the thing. It's just not perfect. It's an imperfect world now. And this desire and this craving to get back to normal is so unfounded. It's like... I mean, I did a reply to a friend's tweet just on Saturday, I think, and it ended up getting nearly 1,500 likes, 1,500 likes. And I'll read it to you so you can kind of hear what the thing was, because he was responding to Bill Maher's TV show, which I don't watch because I've always thought it never made sense to me, the Bill Maher show. It was always like trying to use comedy in some way to... I don't know. It just seemed untruthful to me, and I'm kind of interested in the truth. And Bill Maher's show just seemed to be like riddled with opinion, and I never really got that. But my friend kind of wrote a line about a clip of Barry Weiss complaining to Bill Maher, saying we haven't got back to normal and it's ridiculous at this point. And he said, my young children have been more mature and less childish about dealing with a once-in-a-century pandemic than the likes of Weiss and Bill Maher, right? And I wrote, same. I put, it's offensive that some people can't sacrifice a moment of their precious lives for the greater good. And you see, I see this as a moment because... life is not our lives. It's not the 70, 80, 90, 100 years that we might live as individuals. Life goes on. Life is our parents and it's our children. It's generational, right? And so this pandemic is but a moment in that timeline. And so to make a sacrifice, to wear a mask to protect others, to get vaccinated to protect yourself and others, these are small sacrifices, in my view, compared to the sacrifices of my grandparents during the Second World War, where they said goodbye to their loved ones and never knew if they would see them again, or whether they weren't able to eat eggs or have meat. Like the food was rationed. They had powdered egg and powdered milk. It was disgusting. They had to ration toothpaste. All of these things. And there's millions of people with worse off lives than us with masks on. You look at the developing nations and look at people struggling there. And they actually look happier than a lot of Americans. Children playing with a ball, and that's all they have. And they look happier because they haven't been compromised by this capitalist notion of having what you want when you want. And so my point is that, us wearing a mask and not getting back to normal is a small price to pay in the bigger scheme of things, because the bigger scheme of things is the whole world suffering this pandemic. And yet, there are likes of this comedian, Weiss. I don't really know anything about her, Barry Weiss. But the speech that she made on the Bill Maher show was funny, but completely misinformed. And Maher appeared to agree, and the audience all applauded. And it was like, yeah, we're done with this pandemic. 2 years, it's too long, it's enough already, forget the rules. And it was very, very painful to watch. And it's gone viral. And so my friend Mehdi, who did this tweet, he got 16,000 likes over it. And my reply got 1,200 likes. You know, it's obviously a very powerful subject. And this is my point about having perspective on people that have less than you. Can you imagine how people in developing nations who are trying to fight off, who are desperately trying to fight off COVID, who don't have vaccines? Only 4% of people in Africa have vaccines or have been vaccinated. Can you imagine how would they feel if they knew that someone like her, a successful comedian who's on a TV show, who's paid very handsomely, is complaining about the sacrifice she's having to make when she still has a luxurious lifestyle? She still is able to enjoy all the trappings of a modern capitalist American lifestyle. The only difference is she might have to do some meetings on Zoom and not go out for lavish lunches with her friends in an indoor restaurant. That's the sacrifice she's making, compared to the sacrifice of the people who have nothing, whose children are probably going to die because they are not able to get the medical care that they need. And they don't even realize they're sacrificing in developing nations because they have no perspective. But here in the West, we've been corrupted. And so we think that it's normal to have our frappuccino whilst, happily strolling through a crowded marketplace where everybody's coughing everywhere. I mean, it's like, do yourself a favor. Have some perspective. And, so I think about my grandparents, and I got criticized a lot for this. I mean, I got called a leftist, libtard, snowflake, and all of these things. I'm none of those things, but fine. I just worry that the people that are saying this, they really don't know what sacrifice is. Worker illnesses strain food supply on the front of the Wall Street Journal this morning. It says the US food system is under renewed strain as COVID-19's Omicron variant stretches workforces from processing plants to grocery stores, leaving gaps on supermarket shelves. In Arizona, 1 in 10 processing plant and distribution workers at a major produce company were recently out sick. In Massachusetts, employee illness has slowed the flow of fish to supermarkets and restaurants. A grocery chain in the US Southeast had to hire temporary workers after about 1/3 of employees at its distribution centers fell ill. Food industry executives and analysts warn that the situation could persist for weeks or months even as the wave of COVID-19 infections eases. So it's happening everywhere. It's getting everybody. Like, no one's going to escape this. And do you know something? The World Health Organization said on Friday, or maybe Saturday, that they're like, don't think Omicron is the end of this. They said there's going to be new mutations. There's going to be more. This is not going away. And that's only going to cause more frustration with the likes of Barry Weiss and people who are done with the pandemic. Just that attitude, I'm done with the pandemic. And this is really maybe what's been miscommunicated by the authorities, the CDC and maybe Joe Biden, is that, he was like, get vaccinated and then you're done. You don't have to wear your mask anymore. And then, of course, that was when Delta was around. And then, of course, Omicron comes and it almost undermines what he said before. But instead of getting up and dealing with that head on and saying, actually, look, it's changed, and so our advice needs to change, he kind of let it slip and left it to the CDC. I really think that Joe Biden is terrible at messaging. Terrible. I think his heart's in the right place, and I think he's doing a relatively good job under the circumstances. But his messaging is terrible. Well, it's weird because, his communications department are actually very good. Jen Psaki and all of the people that work in that communications department are very good. But my worry is that it's him and the vice president, they're maybe just a little old-fashioned. And they don't realize how the world has changed and moved on and how misinformation spreads like wildfire. And I just feel like they need to have more of a, what's the word? They need to have more of a solid, all-encompassing response, Like the fact that they're keeping stum about January 6th, like not explaining like what happened. And what, there's the former Republican presidential nominee, Newt Gingrich. Weird name, isn't it, to be called Newt? But he went on TV yesterday and he said that if the Republicans get back in, they're going to arrest the January 6th committee. They're going to arrest them. He wants them arrested. Think about that for a moment. That's the government turning on itself. That's really the definition of authoritarianism, isn't it? When you start arresting members of the democratically elected government. That's authoritarianism, and that's what he was advocating for yesterday. And I was like, wow, really? Really? Just beggars belief, Okay, let's have a look at a couple more stories on the front of the Wall Street Journal. We need to whiz through this a little bit quicker, so maybe I'll jump onto another one. Let's go to the Bradenton Herald now. Fred has joined us. Hello, Fred. Thank you for being part of the show. Yes, officials, Florida manatees eating lettuce in pilot program. We're going to talk about this a little bit later. Very interesting story, though. Manatees have now become everybody's favorite fish, haven't they? Everybody's favorite fish. Why is that joke funnier in England than it is in America? Do you know what I mean? It's like it seems to me like my humor needs to be repositioned somewhat. Because I think my American friend... Yeah, because my American friends will be like, well, it's a mammal. And my British friends will be like, yeah, it's a fish. Do you see what I mean? And it's like, I think this is the difference if we're trying to encapsulate the difference between British and American humor. I think Americans like to be correct. I think it's all about kind of to have knowledge is to have status. Whereas in England, everyone likes to be a little bit drunk, like even in the morning, and to say things that don't make any sense and agree with it. I mean, I've sat in pubs in London and talked total garbage for hours with people, like just amazing conversations, and none of them make any sense. Like they're all completely factually inaccurate. And everybody has such a great time. Whereas I couldn't do that here. People just would be like, why are you saying that? Maybe the Brits are just so depressed. They're just desperate for something that is like alternative, just to entertain them, take their minds off their real lives. Whereas in America, people are a lot more energized and positive. And so actually, like, reality is far more interesting than fantasy. It's just a theory. Correct me if I'm wrong. Manatees at risk of starvation because native seagrass is dying due to water pollution have for the first time started eating lettuce under an experimental feeding program, Florida wildlife officials said on Friday. The test facility on the East Coast's Indian River Lagoon had its first takers of romaine lettuce on Thursday, leading more manatees to join in. Well, you think this is the start of it? It's just the tip of the iceberg. They said, "We think it's sufficient. When the animals are there, we will continue to offer food and hope they take advantage of that. The program is adding cabbage and a second type of lettuce to entice the manatees, also known as sea cows." Sea cows? I've never heard that before. Really? All of these are common foods given to manatees at rehabilitation facilities. The unprecedented feeding program is a state and federal response to last year's record number of 1,100 documented manatee deaths. Many are starving to death because pollution from agricultural, urban, and other sources have triggered algae blooms that have decimated seagrass beds. Well, you know why this is, don't you? Well, you know what must have contributed to this was Trump's rollback of all of the Environmental Protection Agency rules for polluting rivers and ocean. Do you remember this? Do you remember what happened? He basically, under the headline of less government and freedom, he started to allow all of these factories that were putting their waste material into the oceans and into the rivers. They took away the requirement to limit that. And I don't know if this is, I would be very interested to know how these are connected, because the rollback of the EPA stuff was one of the most upsetting things for me when reading about what that guy was up to. Because they don't care. I mean, what does he care about sea cows? They don't make money for him. His attitude was, if the factory can make more money, more profit, because it's not having to spend money on getting rid of its waste product, its byproduct, in a conservational way, then it's better for business. I mean, this is, unfortunately, this is what you get when you vote for somebody who doesn't care. I mean, remember, Trump didn't know what climate change was. Had no idea, didn't really care. So, you had a guy that didn't know and didn't care, and yet, therefore, was happy to sign off on all the environmental protections being removed. Yeah. Yeah, he literally, he rolled back he basically said, whatever Obama did in the last 8 years, I want that reversed. That was basically the diktat that he gave to his State Department people. Anything that Obama did, reverse it. It literally took America back like 20, 30 years. And there's a photograph of a manatee coming up for breath at the Florida Power and Light Manatee Lagoon in Riviera Beach, Florida on Wednesday. 1,101 manatee deaths were documented last year, many due to starvation. And it's directly related to these environmental rollbacks. Because it was the first thing he did. As soon as he got in, that was what he basically said. Anything that Obama did, reverse it. Also on the front of the Bradenton Herald this morning, it says voting rights debate highlights Rubio and Demings' differences. President Joe Biden, congressional Democrats' push for national voting rights legislation ended with a thud this week in the Senate. But for Florida's Val Demings and Marco Rubio, the standoff offered an opportunity to draw sharp policy contrasts as their Senate race heats up. Demings, an Orlando Democrat mounting a campaign for the U.S. Senate after 3 terms in the U.S. House, repeatedly called on the Senate to pass the House-approved legislation that would expand mail voting nationwide, make Election Day a holiday, and give federal government increased tools to counteract state-level restrictions. It says voting rights are not partisan. Our democracy is not partisan. Our constitution is not partisan. When it comes to protecting our rights, the vote in the Senate should be 100-0, Deming said in a statement on Wednesday evening, as the Senate was locked in a marathon debate. It says instead, the Senate locked 50-50 on the legislation, putting it 10 votes short of the chamber's 60-vote threshold for most bills, after Republicans voted against it, including both of Florida's senators, Rick Scott and Rubio, the incumbent, whom Demings is challenging. Well, Demings is the one that I wanted to be the I wanted to be the vice president. That was my plan. You know, she was a candidate for vice president, Val Demings. She was potentially going to be vice president, and she was beaten to the post. Well, it wasn't beaten because, of course, Biden has to select. Biden has to select. But I mean, it's a very, very interesting space, isn't it? It's a very interesting space when you get these two senators, well, a representative and one senator, going head to head like this. Because Rubio is dangerous, he's another authoritarian character. He's another one of these people who is, he has the potential to be a future candidate for president, right? And yet, he is straight out of the authoritarians' playbook. A lot of them now. Ron DeSantis, our favorite Floridian, all, same. So now they're debating voting rights. It just seems pointless. Rubio's campaign accused Demings of backing a federal takeover of the state's elections. He said Val Demings doesn't care about the real issues facing people in Florida, like record inflation, soaring gas prices, and empty store shelves. Well, none of those things are true. Record inflation is happening all around the world. That's due to the pandemic. Soaring gas prices is not true. They've come down massively because of the Biden and the stockpile. And there are no empty store shelves. That was avoided. And those are not even major issues for Floridians. What are you talking about? He said instead she's trying to ban voter ID and put Washington in charge of Florida's elections. I mean, it is kind of crazy that a federal government is selected by individual states using their own rules. Think about that for a second. Elect your local representatives through state rules. But, for like city positions. But when you're talking about president, surely the rules that should apply should be federal rules. Same for every state. In the days leading up to the vote, Rubio established himself as one of the legislation's most vocal opponents. He castigated it in a floor speech and in a guest column for The Federalist, a conservative website. It's very interesting. I mean, there's going to be a showdown. It's going to be a big showdown. It's all going to happen. And, my other fear, I think my other big fear is that there will be more looting and there will be more, rioting, and there'll be more military on the streets, and all of that stuff is going to come. That's my fear. So I think we've got that to look forward to in many ways. You've got all that to look forward to. The looting, the rioting, all to look forward to. Exactly, at least we're not Ukraine. Okay, let's move on. The Florida news press from Fort Myers. Here we go. They lead with It's for the Kids. Southwest Florida Wine and Food Fest auction raises $2 million. The wine flowed, the auction paddles went up and down, the winning bids kept coming. Oh man, they're having like a whole event, an indoor event. I mean, they're raising money for Children's Hospital, but in Florida, it's almost like the pandemic is over. You know? It just is. It's just over there. Yeah, I mean, I don't mean in terms of hospitalizations. I mean, the hospitals are rammed, you know. The numbers are through the roof, but in terms of the people's attitude to it, they're over it. Oh, excuse me. DeSantis and Trump spar on COVID when Donald Trump decided to take a veiled swipe at Ron DeSantis. He highlighted the governor's equivocating over his COVID-19 vaccine booster shot status, calling politicians who refuse to disclose such information gutless. Says when DeSantis appeared to fire back, he talked about regretting not pushing back against the nationwide lockdown Trump supported early in the pandemic to rein in the spread of the virus. See page 5. Former anchor at Fox 4 files federal discrimination suit against station's VP and Scripps Media. Always nice. Nothing seems to change. And that's all. There's actually not that much on the front of the news press this morning. The Miami Herald, though, different story. FIU employee told university that Rosenberg had been harassing her. Well, more harassment. I mean, what is it with men? Men. And following DeSantis' lead... Sorry? Oh, yeah, it's very, very, very common. Yeah. The Fox News. Yeah. Did you see the movie Bombshell, Carla? The movie Bombshell about Megyn Kelly. Oh, it's fascinating. What a fascinating thing. Says the Republican majority on the Senate Education Committee last week advanced a measure that attempts to tackle one of Governor Ron DeSantis' top legislative priorities, banning the influence of critical race theory in schools and businesses across Florida. But as lawmakers start work on the proposal, they've not yet included a key part of the governor's election year agenda, giving parents, students, and workers the ability to sue if they feel they've been exposed to the influence of critical race theory at school. Oh, my goodness. Or work is not in the bill language. The proposed legislation does not offer those legal enforcement powers, but rather it seeks to restrict discussions that would make workers and students feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological... see page 5. I mean, I almost don't feel I'm able to comment about this stuff anymore because it's just not true. None of it is true. You know, there is no critical race theory. What they're basically doing is they just don't want it to be, they don't want any race issues to be spoken about ever. It's that attitude of if you don't talk about it, then it doesn't exist. But of course that makes the problem worse, doesn't it? And it's only white people that are making these requests. You know? Not a solitary black person was involved in these decisions. It's just white supremacy in Florida. Also, suspected murder suspect had guns seized over mental health concerns on the front of the Miami Herald. Let's move on to the San Antonio Express News. We'll do this one for Stacey because she probably has to leave in a minute. Immigration court swamped, it says. Texas immigration attorney Elizabeth Mendoza has said she has immigration cases that have yet to be resolved after being in court for more than 10 years. The hearings are getting scheduled for 2024 thanks to an historic backlog of 1.6 million cases. The deluge of cases in the U.S. immigration courts is growing at the fastest pace ever recorded, according to a university analysis of court data. So this is the US-Mexico border. It says nearly 140,000 new cases were added to the backlog between October and December, more than any other 3-month period. They say it's not as if the core backlog is growing at a steady rate, it's actually accelerating. So there we go. Can we do the US news update in a second? Because I would like to take my sweater off because it's getting very warm in here, and I would like to do it in the privacy of, not having to look at me. So this is how we deal with these types of things. The US news update is like a daily podcast that I do, and it's actually just designed to give cover for me to make a change. Change my clothes. Are we ready to go? Oh, that's exciting. Okay, well, here comes the US news update. Enjoy yourself. Enjoy.
It's Monday, January 24. From the Volley Network, this is your daily US news update. Anthony Davis. The State Department on Sunday ordered the families of all American personnel at the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine to leave the country amid heightened fears of a Russian invasion. The department told the dependents of staffers at the U.S. Embassy in Kiev they must leave the country. It also said non-essential embassy staff could leave Ukraine at government expense. The move came amid rising tensions about Russia's military buildup on the Ukraine border that were not eased during talks on Friday between Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Geneva. State Department officials stressed the Kiev embassy will remain open. The announcement does not constitute an evacuation. The move had been under consideration for some time and does not reflect an easing of U.S. support for Ukraine, the officials said. Meanwhile, a cruise ship that was supposed to dock in Miami has instead sailed to the Bahamas after a U.S. judge granted an order to seize the vessel as part of a lawsuit over millions of dollars in unpaid fuel. Cruise trackers show Crystal Symphony currently docked in the Bahamian island of Bimini. Some passengers were taken by ferry to Port Everglades in Fort Lauderdale on Sunday. The ferry ride was apparently uncomfortable due to inclement weather. The ship was scheduled to arrive in Miami on Saturday, but a federal judge in Miami issued an arrest warrant for the ship on Thursday, a maritime practice where a U.S. mil goes aboard a vessel and takes charge of it once it enters U.S. waters. Your daily US news update is part of the Volley Network. To hear my live daily morning show, ask your Amazon Echo device to open Backchannel.
There it goes. Yes, that's the US news update. This is the Anthony Davis Show. Welcome to Backchannel, 9:52 here on the West Coast, 12:52 Eastern, and lots to talk about this morning. We're going to take a look at those manatees in some more detail. We're looking through the morning papers at the moment, the San Antonio Express News, talking about the immigration courts swamped, as ever, always seems to happen. Dispute over bones brings suit, refusal to destroy artifacts. This is Chef John McCormack says he refused to engage in what lawsuit had filed. He has filed caused the illegal activity of disposing of artifacts found by a crew working at a restaurant. Isn't that interesting? Stuff from the 1800s, 500 human or animal bones. Wow. I mean, San Antonio, it really is quite a place. And a big painting of Alamo Battle will be an exhibit hall, a massive detailed painting depicting the Alamo during the height of the 1836 battle, will be displayed in a new exhibit hall targeted for completion late this year. Georgia artist Mark Lemon said his work, The Storming of the Alamo, will be moved from its current home to a new $20 million Alamo Exhibit Hall and Collections building. Looks amazing, actually. So there we go. That's and tax filers might have a rougher time of it this year. It says an IRS worker shortage, enormous workload from administering pandemic-related programs, and stored legislation that would have given the agency billions of dollars for more expeditiously processing returns will combine to cause the taxpayer pain this filing season. Yes, the IRS now has unacceptable backlogs. So that's the San Antonio Express News on this Monday morning. We're staying in the area with the El Paso Times next. Maternity deserts grow as staff shortages close rural hospital units. Like, there's nowhere to go to have a baby. That's the reality of this. And it says, in Texas, political campaigning is serious business. This is a story out of Austin that says, after Democrat Tony Sanchez lost the 2002 race for governor, he lavishly financed with his own money. A now retired Capitol Press Corp wise guy cracked that if the Laredo banking and oil tycoon were truly serious about wanting to help Texas, he'd keep his campaign going even in defeat. The reporter's reasoning, the state's economy couldn't stand the shock of a $65 million enterprise going belly up overnight. He's referring to the amount that Sanchez put up and spent on his way to losing to Republican Rick Perry 20 years ago. And as coincidence might have it, the $65 million is about the amount the current governor, two-term Republican Greg Abbott, has in the bank as the 2022 campaign is shifting into high gear heading into the March primaries. Well, $65 million 20 years ago was a lot more money than $65 million now. But there we go. That's the El Paso Times. So, yeah, we can jump onto a few more. James has joined us as well. We've got Fred, Jimmy, Stacey. Hello. Thanks for hanging out. Just a reminder that Backchannel has a growing list of shows, including Haley and Allison Live, waking you up in the morning with lots of laughs and their one-star cinema review, or Live Every Day with Liv Harrison, live from Texas, celebrating the little things in life with plenty of coffee. Or what about the charming and funny Hal Rudnick, whose program, Your Pal Hal, directly follows this show at 11 a.m. Pacific, that's 2 o'clock Eastern. Should we jump on to a couple more newspapers and then we'll get deep into our debates this morning? Richmond Times-Dispatch leads with school board votes to contest mask order. Dozens of RPS teachers will call in sick on Monday. That's a nice way of handling this. Advocates say that residents of Southwood have not heard from Miaris' office. They're concerned about attorney who started an inquiry was fired. And also, are these signs making cities' pedestrians safer? There's a new yellow and white sign, street signs, ordering motorists to stop for pedestrians at 55 intersections throughout the city, are beginning to show scuffs, tyre marks and other evidence, wear and tear, a year after they were installed. They have these in England as well, in London, these little signs that stick out of the ground. And they're also in a terrible condition. People just drive over them. I don't know what the science is behind this. They've obviously tested them. They reckon that they're helpful. But I can't see how they are. It's like little signs that flip back and forth. So if you knock into them, they've got some movement in them. It's almost like they know they're going to be hit. And they say stop for pedestrians on them. There's a photograph of a resident of Richmond's north side. And it says the city installed 2 new pedestrian warning signs at the intersection in 2021. One of them is missing. Yeah. And Stoney tests positive for COVID again, said symptoms are far milder. This is Richmond Mayor Levar Stoney. Stoney has tested positive again for COVID, almost exactly a year after first being infected with the virus. His symptoms are far milder this time, he wrote in a tweet Sunday afternoon, a fact he attributes to being fully vaccinated and boosted in line with Centers for Disease Control and Prevention guidelines. The mayor plans to isolate for 5 days. It says Jim Nolan, Stoney's press secretary, said any future planned events or meetings that have been postponed due to the mayor's positive test result will be announced on Monday. Since his symptoms began on Saturday, his isolation period will be up on Thursday as he tests positive on a rapid test at the end of those 5 days that would extend Stoney's isolation to February 1st. Interesting. Okay, Washington Times, then the Chicago Tribune, and then that's it for the newspapers because, we're bang on time. Look at that. First hour of the show. Unbelievable. Who'd have thought? How do we do it? Nobody knows. Completely random. Russia plots political coup in Ukraine. State Department orders embassy families to leave country on brink of war. Yes, Moscow plans to force out Ukraine's political leaders and install a pro-Russian puppet regime in Kiev. British officials said over the weekend as the West desperately tries to stave off war in Eastern Europe at a moment when Russian action against its neighbour seems all but inevitable. The accusations from the British Foreign Office late on Saturday, reinforced by the Secretary of State Antony Blinken here in the US, fiercely denied by the Kremlin, added even more fuel to a combustible standoff along the Russia-Ukraine border. They also put renewed pressure on the Biden administration, which is facing growing criticism at home for its refusal to unleash massive economic sanctions on Russia now rather than wait for military action. So interesting, yes, and also non-citizens granted right to vote and show little interest. This is interesting. James is brand new here. James from Hawaii, thank you for joining Backchannel. You're very welcome to join the party. Yes, it says Montpellier City Clerk John Odom chuckled when he was asked how many non-citizens had registered to vote ahead of the Vermont city's municipal elections in March, the first time they will have had the chance to cast ballots. Not a single person has asked to be signed up, he said. The city residents went through a significant ordeal to grant legally present non-citizens the right to vote. They won an amendment by the city charter, got approval from the state legislature, and then surmounted a governor's veto. Yet, with just a few weeks to go, non-citizens don't seem to have much interest in flexing their new power. Right now, we have zero. I mean, this is crazy, isn't it? As New York City mayor moves to expand voting rights in local elections to non-citizens, including illegal immigrants, cities have experimented with the policy and found people don't rush to sign up. I mean, isn't that the tragedy of this whole conversation? Like, everything we talk about is about protecting voting, you know, having the opportunity to express your right to a vote, all this stuff, and yet, given the opportunity, people have no interest. I mean, I don't even get to vote in America, and I'm kind of sad about that. But that's just the law. Oh, I am religious about voting in England and telling my friends to vote and being an activist for voting, and I wouldn't dream of telling anybody who to vote for, but my message is always, please vote. That's my message. Always. People really don't realize the value of it. But it's done now anyway. You know, it's gone. In America, it's gone. Because all of these 41 states that have got all this legislation in place now to manipulate the vote, your vote is irrelevant now, effectively. It's, you know, they're going to pick whoever they want to pick to win. A photograph of Mayor Lightfoot speaking at Chicago's police headquarters on the 4th of January. The headline is Lightfoot's campaign cash not keeping pace. Yes, Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot, who famously has the worst clothes. Do you know about this, Carla? This is very interesting. Lori Lightfoot has the worst clothes, and people talk about it. It's like a whole thing. You can look it up, like Lori Lightfoot outfits. She dresses like a homeless person. Like anything she has found, she'll put on. And it's very endearing because she's an excellent mayor. So it's irrelevant what she wears. But it really is very interesting to me that she's not one of these people that like needs to be like perfectly dressed. She just wants to do a good job. Unfortunately, it does matter, yeah. Well, she certainly isn't spending the money on her clothes, put it that way. It says here that she's been spending campaign money faster than she's been raising it, leaving her with less political cash than she had shortly after winning office 2.5 years ago. The mayor's 2 campaign funds have bled $213,000 during that time. As Lightfoot raised $2.67 million but spent $2.88 million, a Chicago Tribune analysis of state campaign finance records found. As a result, the $1.78 million Lightfoot has had on hand in June has shrunk. Lightfoot is widely expected to seek a second term, but she's yet to launch a re-election bid. I mean, isn't it crazy? Just think about this, because the country that I come from, mayors do not need to raise this kind of money to become mayor. It's not done with money. That's not how it works. We have other ways of doing it. They're not perfect, but But think of the wastage. Think of the wastage. She raised $2.67 million. She raised that money just so she could stay the mayor. It's like, wow. Oh, yeah, she's definitely one of the good guys. Yeah. Typically, incumbents stockpile campaign money during non-election years, conserving their cash for expensive television ads, direct mail, and get-out-the-vote efforts closer to Election Day. But Lightfoot has outstripped her fundraising by spending steadily on campaign staffers, consultants, poll advertising, events, travel, and more, averaging nearly $100,000 per month in expenses. So there we go. That's the Chicago Tribune. And finally, it says CDC data, booster shots beneficial. Booster shots of the Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna vaccines are not just preventing infections with the contagious Omicron variant, they're also keeping Americans from ending up in the hospital, according to data published on Friday by the CDC. The extra doses are 90% effective against hospitalizations with the variant, the agency reported. Booster shots also reduce the likelihood of a visit to an emergency department or urgent care clinic. The extra doses were most effective against infection and death among Americans 50 and older, it says. They say if you're eligible for a booster and you haven't got one, you need to get your booster, said Rochelle Walensky during a briefing on Friday. Overall, the new data shows that the vaccines were more protective against the Delta variant than against Omicron, which lab studies have found is partly able to sidestep the body's immune system. It's generally accepted that booster shots keep people from becoming infected at least for a while. So, Maria's joined us. It's your first time in New Jersey. Hi, Maria. Thank you for joining Backchannel. I'm Anthony Davis. It's the Anthony Davis Show. We do it for 2 hours every morning here, or if you're on the East Coast, then you'll be getting it in the afternoon. What is it, 1 o'clock for you now? And we're just taking a look at the Chicago Tribune and discussing the fact that the new data shows that vaccines are more protective against the Delta variant than Omicron. And data from Israel and other countries has also suggested that boosters can help prevent severe illness and hospitalizations, especially in older adults. Okay, well, that kind of wraps up our newspaper review this morning. It's always interesting to have a good handle on what's happening across America of a day. You know, to be informed is better to be uninformed or misinformed, I always say. We're going to look at the TTP now, aren't we? This is kind of interesting. Do you remember a little while ago I talked about this Asia-Pacific Trade Pact and what's kind of going on with it? We're in a bit of a situation here, because on this day in 2017, President Trump withdrew the U.S. from the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. And the remaining members of the Trade Pact have forged ahead with a new version, leaving the U.S. role in the Asia-Pacific in question. And, I mean, this is really, it's just remarkable that this is what I was talking about earlier about, the Environmental Protection Agency, like undoing everything. If Obama did it, undo it. No analysis of what it does, how it benefits the country. His attitude was, if Obama did it, undo it. So, TPP, EPA, Paris Climate Accord, Iran nuclear deal. I mean, the guy even wanted to leave NATO. Do you remember that? He was threatening leaving NATO. So the Trans-Pacific Partnership was the centerpiece of US President Barack Obama's strategic pivot to Asia. Before Trump withdrew the United States in 2017, the TPP was set to become the world's largest free trade deal, covering 40% of the global economy. And he came out of it not knowing how to do a deal that was better, because he can't do deals. For For its supporters, such a deal would have expanded US trade and investment abroad, spurned economic growth, lowered consumer prices, and created new jobs, while also advancing US strategic interests in the Asia-Pacific region. But its detractors, including Donald Trump, saw the deal as likely to accelerate US decline in manufacturing, lower wages, and increased inequality. It's just not true. Oh, hi, Maria. And Aurora, thank you. Lovely to see you. It says, with the United States on the sidelines, the remaining TPP countries have forged ahead with a new version of the pact, known as the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's now the CPTPP, keeping most of the original intact. In September 2021, China applied to join the pact, putting further pressure on the United States. Joe Biden has said that he does not support rejoining the TPP as it stands, but that he could try and renegotiate it to include stronger labor and environmental provisions. Yeah, but my attitude is that if you want to contribute with a kind of global economy, then you see it as an opportunity to increase manufacturing in the United States. So instead of being like, oh, it's going to mean more imports from China, more imports from, South Asia, whatever, you're going to be like, well, we're just going to compete with that ourselves. We're going to export our goods as well as import their goods. It's a trade deal. It's a partnership. It's supposed to encourage industry. The impetus for what became the TPP was a 2005 trade agreement between a small group of Pacific Rim countries comprising of Brunei, Chile, New Zealand, and Singapore. In 2008, George W. Bush announced the United States would begin trade talks with the group, leading Australia, Vietnam, and Peru to join. As the talks proceeded, the group expanded to include Canada, Japan, Malaysia, and Mexico, 12 countries in all. And upon taking office in 2009, Obama continued the talks. In 2011, Hillary Clinton, who was Secretary of State, framed the TPP as the centerpiece of the United States' strategic pivot to the Asia-Pacific region. And after 19 official rounds of negotiations, all that work. I mean, all the work. Many more separate meetings. Can you imagine, if you were instrumental in all of this effort to close this deal that had been going on over decades? Yeah, people's life's work to make this work for America. After 19 official rounds of negotiations, many more meetings, the participating countries came to an agreement in October 2015. They signed the pact in early 2016. Then Trump comes along in January 2017 and he withdrew from the TPP on his first day in office. First day. Do you know what that means? He didn't even read it. He didn't read it. He didn't read the Iran nuclear deal. He just didn't like the fact that it had the word Iran in it. He's like, why would we do a deal with Iran? Didn't read it. Didn't know what it was. Paris Climate Accord? Don't like the French. Get out of that. It's got nothing to do with the French. The Paris Climate Accord has got nothing to do with the French. It's just where they happen to sign the deal. Oh, man. He never read anything. He literally never read anything, including the Constitution. So that's why, first week of office, Muslim ban, banning all Muslims from all Muslim majority countries. Come out of the TPP. The text of the TPP consists of 30 chapters, covering tariffs on goods and services, intellectual property rights, e-commerce rules, labor and environmental standards, dispute resolution mechanisms, and many other aspects of global trade. The goal of this ambitious deal, one of spanning several continents and covering 40% of the world trade, was to fully integrate to create a fully integrated economic area and establish consistent rules for global investment. For Obama, the pact was a means to ensure that the United States, and not countries like China, is the one writing this century's rules for the world's economy. All gone. Yeah. So, did you even know what it was? Have you even heard of it? Are you even aware of how the TPP has benefited you? It didn't It was only really in use for about a year and a half before it got cancelled. Trump had criticized the deal for a while, claiming that it would push more manufacturing jobs overseas, increase the US trade deficit, and fail to address currency manipulation by US trade partners. The thing is, the world is changing all the time, isn't it? The world economy is changing, and the superpowers have changed over the years as well. And who are the superpowers now? Who are the leading superpowers? Russia is like a superpower in terms of nuclear capability, but in terms of economy, it has nothing. China's got it all. The US has got it all, sorry. So the CPTPP, the new one, was explicitly written with an eye toward expansion. During the original negotiation, South Korea was seen as a likely future member. More recently, Colombia, Taiwan, and Thailand have expressed interest in joining. In February 2021, a year after its formal departure from the European Union, the United Kingdom requested to join the CPTPP. I bet it did. Because it burned its bridges with everybody else. So that's the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's very interesting. I really feel like we need to make more effort to learn about what these things are that are, instigating and supporting and creating this global exchange of goods and services and skills and finance. We ignore it at our peril. These beats, I'm telling you. I feel like I'm like a DJ at a wedding that nobody wants to be at. Should we talk about the manatees? Because I think this is, something that people don't really realize is how serious this is. I hate the fact that all of the news at the moment seems to all of the issues and the problems seem to go back to mistakes that Donald Trump made. Do you know what I mean? The TPP, the EPA. Despite their size and stubbly snout, manatees seem cute and cuddly to many ocean visitors. These large, slow-moving marine animals hang out in coastal areas and rivers where Florida spring breakers can easily see them and think that it's a good idea to hop on for a ride. Not only is this and other forms of harassment, such as hugging the sea creatures, illegal, because the West Indian manatee is listed as an endangered species in the US, it can also impact manatees' natural behavior, changing the way they interact with humans. Who gets and hugs a manatee? I mean, what type of person does that? Is this like a Floridian thing? Is this what you do if you live in Florida? You're just like, oh yeah, we go hug manatees. So there's the Amazonian manatee, the West Indian manatee, and the West African manatee. And the related dugong are considered vulnerable, facing high risk of extinction by the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species. This is due to a variety of threats, including boat collisions, hunting, habitat destruction, and toxic red tides. They say it's unclear if the manatees' sweet looks can save them. In their favor is the fact that we're no longer deliberately chasing them down, unlike how humans hunted to extinction their long-lost relative, the Steller's sea cow, in the 18th century. But even slight disturbances to their lifestyles can do irreplaceable harm. So, if you do see a manatee, look but don't touch. They're funny-looking things. They really are. I wish I could describe them. They're like an armadillo underwater crossed with a rhinoceros. They're like an armadillo underwater crossed with a rhinoceros. Big, ugly. They're like a blob seal. Do you know what a blob seal looks like? Have you ever seen a blob seal, Carla? Blob seal. That's what they look like, but just less overweight.
They need warm water, you know. They need the warm water for the West Indian and West African manatee species. With low metabolic rates and minimal fat protection from cold water, they stick to water that's 60 degrees or warmer. They may look fat and insulated, but the large body of the manatee is mostly made up of their stomach. Well, I knew I had something in common with them. And they go to the surface of the water every 3 to 5 minutes to breathe, although they can remain underwater for longer, holding their breath for up to 20 minutes. When they do take a breath, 90% of the air in their lungs is replaced, whereas humans tend to replace about 10% of the lungs in their air. An Amazonian manatee is entirely living in freshwater rivers throughout South America and the Amazon basin. And it's hard to estimate their numbers due to their secretive nature and the murky water where they often live. They're the strangest looking things. The snout is the thing I find most fascinating. It opens right up. They're not attractive. I mean, you wouldn't want to marry one of these. You know, the photographs, the wedding pictures would look terrible. The closest living relative is the elephant, apparently. Manatees evolved from the same land animals as elephants over 50 million years ago. And the fossil record shows a much more diverse group than we have today. Humans have got one round of baby teeth, and then if we lose or hurt an adult tooth, a trip to the dentist is in order. Manatees, like their elephant relatives, continuously replace their teeth throughout their lives, with the older teeth at the front falling out and the new teeth growing in at the back of their mouth. That's disgusting. Have you ever looked at a set of kids' teeth in an X-ray of like a 5-year-old's teeth in an X-ray and seen all the adult teeth sitting above the baby teeth? You ever seen that? Because all the adult teeth are up there all the time. They're there from birth, the adult teeth. They just become like they're part of the bone. And then they push down and push the baby teeth out. But they're all up there. So if you go on the internet and you search like baby teeth X-ray, directly above and below the teeth, you'll see adult teeth inside the human mouth, ready to go. It's fascinating. Our adult teeth sit above and below our baby teeth inside our jaw. They're already there. They don't just grow. They don't just grow when you need them. They're already there. They push down. It's incredible. The humans are amazing. And some of us are so stupid. You know? So what a interesting collection of humans we really are. Christopher Columbus and the other early explorers claims to have seen female figures swimming in the ocean. The mermaids in the writings and drawings of this era, whether they'd been at sea for too long or it was a trick of the light, we now know that many of these encounters were with manatees. The manatee brain is small compared to our own, and the ratio of their brain to their body size is the lowest of any mammal. So they may not be as clever as dolphins, but manatees can learn basic tasks. They're extremely sensitive to touch, and they can differentiate colors. That's probably quite useful when they go for an eye test. And the female manatee usually has one calf every 2 to 5 years, and the calf then stays and nurses for 2 years. Calves nurse from their mother's teats, which are found right where the forward limbs meet the body. And the calves also start eating plants after a few weeks old. And they also have an irregular number of vertebrae, just 6 for the manatee. Because if you're a mammal, whether you're a human or a giraffe or a whale or a rat, then you've typically got 7 neck vertebrae. Only tree sloths and manatees have an irregular number of vertebrae. Something to do with their slow metabolism. Yeah, their closest relation is the elephant. The elephant, and also Donald Trump. The former president is the closest relation to the manatee. Similar eating style, like a snout. And they've got no natural predators in the wild, but humans have played a large part in making all 3 species at risk of extinction.
About half of West Indian manatee deaths are caused by humans, and most are due to boat collisions. Manatees are quite buoyant, and they use their horizontally placed diaphragm and breathing to control their buoyancy. This and their average speed of 3 to 5 miles an hour means that manatees are way too slow to escape from the path of a speeding boat. That's such a shame, isn't it? I mean, I'll be honest, I didn't think I really even knew what a manatee was before this whole manatee conversation started a few months ago here in the US. I don't think I even knew what one was. No, I mean, I'm happy to say it out loud. I had no idea, never heard of a manatee before. I mean, it's just like, we don't get them in England, so obviously we're not gonna know what it is. So Florida has got this pilot program where they're going to try and feed them, or they've started to feed them, because now they're at risk of starvation because this native seagrass is dying due to water pollution. And so for the first time, they've started eating lettuce under this experimental feeding program. The test facility on the East Coast Indian River's lagoon has its first takers of romaine lettuce Thursday last week, leading more manatees to join in. I mean, could they not give them, I don't know, some kale or something really healthy, with a little vinaigrette dressing? I mean, just neat lettuce. It's where's the fun in that? It says, in addition to the feeding experiment, officials are working with a number of facilities to rehabilitate distressed manatees that are found alive. And these include Florida zoos, the SeaWorld theme park, and marine aquariums. There were 159 rescued manatees in 2021, some of which require lengthy care and some that have been reunited to the wild. There's about 7,520 wild manatees in Florida waters currently, according to state statistics. The slow-moving round-tailed mammals have rebounded enough to list them as a threatened species rather than endangered, although a push is on to restore the endangered tag, given the starvation deaths. Hello, John. Hello, Aurora, Maria, James, Fred, Jimmy. Thank you for spending your morning with Backchannel. I'm Anthony Davis. It's the Anthony Davis Show. We're discussing the manatees at the moment, eating lettuce in a pilot program and seeing how the cold weather has driven these marine mammals toward warmer waters. We're learning something, because I didn't know what a manatee was. Well, they don't have a neck, these creatures, do they? They literally have to, the former president was like that as well. He literally had to turn his entire body round in order to see what was coming from behind him. It's like walking down a ramp or trying to drink a glass of water. I mean, these things were very difficult. A reminder that Backchannel has a growing list of shows, including Haley and Allison Live, waking you up in the morning with lots of laughs, and their one-star cinema review, or Live Every Day with Liv Harrison, live from Texas, celebrating the little things in life with plenty of coffee. And also the charming and funny Hal Rudnick, whose program, Your Pal Hal, directly follows this show at 11 o'clock Pacific, that's 2 o'clock Eastern, right here on Backchannel. And you can keep Backchannel on in your home. If you've got a Amazon Echo device, then you can listen, or if you've got an Echo Show device, you can watch and listen and talk back as well. Just wake up your device, say the word, whatever the wake up word is, then say, and then your message. That's how it works. And if you don't have a show, then you could go to a web browser on your phone or on your computer, type in backchannel.tv, and you can message me there as well. 10:29 is the time here on the West Coast. Should we talk about tax filing season? Because, it's a big thing. It's a big thing. It's about to happen. The good news is that starting today, you can file your taxes and get a refund if one is owed. The bad news is that filing those taxes might be more difficult than it was in the past. Some of the problems have already been getting well documented. For example, getting through to the IRS on the telephone, never all that easy to begin with, is going to be especially difficult. And this is, as we know, due to coronavirus, and it's affecting the workforce. The paper backlog at the IRS also stands at millions and millions of pieces, and the agency is pleading with taxpayers to file electronically. Those who do and those who don't have particularly complicated returns and file without mistakes can expect a refund within about 3 weeks. Well, the IRS Commissioner, Chuck Rettig, is going to speak later today about the start of the filing season, but it might not be a great omen that unexpected challenges are starting to spill out, even before the agency officially starts accepting returns. So the IRS is mailing taxpayer notices detailing how much they received in monthly child tax credit payments last year, and in many cases that amount is wrong. Interesting. They say it's not clear how many people have been affected by those incorrect letters from the IRS, but it could be in the millions or at least hundreds of thousands. This is no small deal either. The IRS has been stressing that taxpayers need to use those notices to figure out how much more they might be able to get out of last year's expansion of the child tax credit. And they got those, and those who got wrong information could see their refunds delayed or face other problems with their returns. I find it all very complicated, and I'm not great with the numbers, so I have an accountant work it all out. I'm just like, please work it all out. Here's everything. Here's what I earned, is what I spent. Please work it all out. And this is why these people make so much money. Because they rely on people like me and possibly you who don't know what they're doing. So we need professional support and advice. But what's interesting this year, with the coronavirus pandemic, affecting the IRS's, because everyone's terrified of the IRS, right? It's like a whole thing here, right? You don't want to get late on your taxes, and there is this. I do think there's like a psychological fear that has been created purposely by successive governments to make you scared of the tax people. It was certainly the same for me in England. You were in fear of the tax people, which is why you tried so hard to make sure that you got everything right, dotted every I, crossed every T. But where does that come from? That feeling that, if you are late with your payments or something, that you're going to be... Is it that they threaten you with imprisonment or something? Is it that the threats are so great? Is that what it is? Bailiffs. Yeah, they threaten you with bailiffs. Yeah, it's pretty scary, isn't it? It's pretty scary. But I do think about that sometimes. I think, because if you've ever phoned the IRS or the tax office, as I did in England, to ask for help, they're really nice. And I think that's very interesting, isn't it? You're made to fear this department, like it's the scariest place, that if you don't, they're going to do this, and they're taking your money that you've earned, and all that type of stuff. But the reality is that when you actually talk to them, they're completely normal, completely nice, very helpful. They want to help. They want to get it right with you. And so this fear that we have in the backs of our minds is really like unfounded. Like, where does that come from? And I think it must be due to like government propaganda over the years. A range of Democrats and their allies have urged the IRS to prioritize getting lower-income taxpayers their refunds as the filing system kicks off. And even while noting that they sympathize with the agency, they believe that has been hamstrung by not getting enough funding. The National Treasury Employees Union, which represents thousands of IRS employees, followed that up on Friday with a statement imploring Congress to increase the agency's funding. They said IRS employees are ready to tackle the problem, but the real culprits are the decade of budget cuts, a smaller workforce, increased workload, and a global pandemic. And it's true enough that Republicans have led the charge in limiting the IRS's budget over the last decade or more. For their part, Republicans have charged for years that the tax collector doesn't do a particularly efficient job with the resources it's given, and knocked President Joe Biden and congressional Democrats for favoring IRS enforcement funding over more money for taxpayer services. It's very interesting. I learned so much on this program, I really do. I mean, it's such a... It's just, you know, because sometimes I feel like we have conversations that people don't really want to have. You know, it's like we need to know this stuff. So right now, the IRS can't deliver refunds to taxpayers until the 15th of February, the result of an anti-fraud measure placed into that big tax extender package back in 2015 that's meant to give the agency more time to cross-check tax returns with W-2 forms. But the result is that a well-intentioned policy is unfair to lots of lower-income people. Americans who file their taxes early should not be penalized for their scrupulousness. It's very, it's fascinating, really. Biden himself has talked about potentially breaking off big parts of the Democrats' climate and safety net package, but there are plenty of procedural questions for Democrats to consider as they're seeking to salvage as much as they can of the Biden social spending agenda. Build back better, you see. It's got this IRS funding built into it. So have you filed your taxes yet? How does it work? Because like in England, like if you work for a company and they tax you on your income as you earn it, they call it pay as you earn, you don't have to file any taxes. It's just done for you. But I have a feeling that here in the US, even if you're on that type of a system, you still need to file your taxes. It's crazy. Yeah, that's right. More people who've been making money on the side, you know, in the gig economy or just working from home and running home businesses because of the pandemic. I suppose it's going to be increasingly more complex for them to know what they should be doing to submit their taxes, and also how to kind of aggregate their income. And the other problem is that people have probably spent the money they were saving to pay their taxes with, because no one's got any money. And so, you know, if you were keeping like 20% aside for tax, the chances are you probably spent that already on food. That's the tragedy of this, isn't it? Should we talk about Brian Wilson, just to cheer ourselves up a little bit? Because I think he really is, you know, we're 7 minutes ahead of schedule, but I think it's totally doable. I'll be honest, I've always liked the Beach Boys. And Brian Wilson is, you know, brilliant. Hello, Roy. Thank you for joining Backchannel. John, Aurora, Maria, James, Fred, Jimmy. Everyone's part of the show today. So, Roy, you're very welcome. You listening on an Amazon Echo device? I think so. And if you want to see me, you can go to YouTube or buy yourself an Echo Show, or you can just go to YouTube, as I just said. And you could even message us via backchannel.tv on a web browser. With songs including California Girls, Good Vibrations, and God Only Knows, Brian Wilson and his band, the Beach Boys, took Californian surf music and made it famous around the world. Well, later this year he turns 80, and a new cinema documentary called Long Promised Road looks back on his life, including the hard times and his long struggle with serious mental health problems. Labeled by the press as a musical genius while still in his 20s, Brian Wilson would produce more than 24 top 40 hits as a member of the original Beach Boys. Yet substance abuse and mental health issues would force the singer-songwriter-composer to withdraw from the world just as his professional star was reaching new heights. Yeah, he is seriously gifted. But, the first thing that comes to mind for me when I talk about him like this is how much of his mental illness is responsible for his genius. This is the area that is like my favorite subject when it comes to people like him. He was born in Hawthorne, California in 1942. It was during his high school that him and his two younger brothers, Carl and Dennis, and his cousin, Mike Love, and friend Al Jardine would form what would become one of America's greatest rock bands, the Beach Boys. They started as a garage band in 1961. The group's blended harmonies, sophisticated arrangements, and innovative recording techniques would propel their music to the top of the charts and provide impetus to the growing youth culture, quickly embracing the look and sounds of Southern California surf life. And with father Murray as manager, and Wilson, who was almost completely deaf in his right ear following a physical head trauma as a child, in the role of songwriter, producer, and frontman, the Beach Boys' first album in 1962 was called Surfin' Safari. It introduced the band's early sound. And subsequent albums, Surfin' USA, Surfer Girl, Little Deuce Coupe, the seminal Pet Sounds, and chart-topping platinum single Good Vibrations would turn them into international music celebrities. But by 1967, Wilson had suffered a nervous breakdown and become so uncomfortable appearing on stage that he quit touring, retreating to a more background and creative role. And he actually turned to drugs to battle his depression. As their success continued to skyrocket in the late 60s and early 70s, he sank further into seclusion, turning to heavier and heavier drug use, particularly cocaine and hallucinogens such as LSD, in an effort to combat the worsening depression that could render him unable to get out of bed for days. In rare public appearances, he was photographed dressed only in his bathrobe, as alcohol abuse and overeating pushed his weight past 300 pounds. He would ultimately be diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, a mental health disorder resulting in ongoing hallucinations, depression, paranoia, and sometimes mania. When he was interviewed in 2006 by Ability magazine, he said, "For the past 40 years, I've had auditory hallucinations in my head, all day, every day, and I can't get them out. Every few minutes, the voices say something derogatory to me, which discourages me a little bit. But I have to be strong enough to say to them, hey, would you quit stalking me? Don't talk to me, leave me alone. I have to say these types of things all day long. It's like a fight." But a psychologist helped Wilson take charge of his health and became very involved in his life. So worried had his family become by the mid-1970s, Wilson's then wife employed psychologist Dr. Eugene Landy in an effort to help Wilson control his drug dependency and take charge of his overall health. Monitoring the singer-songwriter 24 hours a day with a team of assistants, Landy would help Wilson gain some control over his physical and mental health, but would also be accused of exploiting his control over his patient during almost 15 on-again, off-again years that Wilson was in his care. Landy became so involved in every aspect of Wilson's life, he would be listed as a collaborator on the singer's 1988 solo album, had Wilson's memoir dedicated to him, and was named a beneficiary in his will. But, and these stories always have a but, don't they? In 1991, Wilson's family sued Landy, obtaining a restraining order against the doctor. Landy would eventually lose his license to practice psychology in California, but remained close to Wilson throughout the rest of his life. Wilson credited Landy with helping his recovery through medication and forced abstinence, resulting in his return to performing and producing new music. Their relationship was the subject of the 2014 biopic Love and Mercy, starring John Cusack as Wilson and Paul Giamatti as Landy. That's interesting. Paul Giamatti used to be my neighbour. It's just LA stuff, you know? He was my neighbour. Used to see him every day. In fact, we spent Halloween together a couple of years ago, just before the pandemia, at a house party. Wilson's friends credit his ongoing well-being to his second wife, Melinda, who he married in 1995 and has 5 adopted children. They say she got him to see the right doctors. She's provided a family environment for him. They actually do things together, though Wilson admits he continues to struggle and still occasionally sees a therapist. He said, "On my good days, I feel creative, I laugh a lot, I go to my piano and play, and some days I don't feel creative, and I don't talk to anybody." I find it I need to watch that film, with John Cusack and Paul Giamatti. Love and Mercy. I need to see that. Because I honestly feel like... I need to watch that. Oh, I like Elizabeth Shue. Yeah, she's great. I'm just writing it down, just so I can remember to watch it. Yeah, I'm going to see that. Elizabeth Banks, yes, always confused with Elizabeth Shue. You know, the shoe's definitely on the other foot. Through his creative and performing output continues to be strong, he says he is aware his mental health must always come first. He postponed dates on his 2019 Pet Sounds and Greatest Hits live tour after back surgeries caused him to feel mentally insecure. The Beach Boys icon has been in the studio recording and rehearsing with his band when his mental health issues crept back, he said, causing him to struggle with stuff in my head and saying things I don't mean. Can you imagine being in the band or being like a session musician or being on the tour or being somebody who's around him where potentially, if he's not well enough that day, that everything has to stop and they can't rehearse or they can't record or... You see what it's very... it's... he must have some very patient people around him who all adore him, I'm sure. He said, "It's no secret that I've been living with mental illness for many decades. There were times when it was unbearable, but with doctors and medications, I've been able to live a wonderful, healthy and productive life with support from my family, friends and fans who have helped me through this journey." Lovely, isn't it? I'm really interested, though, about this relationship with Paul Landy. Is that his name? Yeah. Because... How do you credit him? Sorry, Eugene Landy. How do you credit Eugene Landy with controlling your drug dependency and taking charge of your overall health and, helping you get clean and all of this stuff? And then sue him in 1991, getting a restraining order against the doctor. Then the doctor loses his license. But then crediting him with helping the recovery and forming a close bond with him. That's what I find so interesting, that you would suddenly sue him in the middle of all this and then go back, everything. I need to see the film. Really the thing that is most interesting about Brian Wilson and anybody who's, suffers similar health issues is the vulnerability. This huge amount of vulnerability that means that they do ultimately put their trust in people, to such an extent, because they just feel like they can't make decisions for themselves. And that's when people take advantage. Should we have a little recap on the stuff we've been discussing today? Because I think we've covered a lot. We talked about the manatee feeding experiment in Florida, where they're feeding endangered manatees with lettuce. And they seem to like it. They have quite simple tastes, clearly. Also on this day in 2017, Donald Trump withdrew the US from the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. So we were discussing what the TPPA is, and we took a look at what it's being replaced with and who was into it and who wasn't into it, and how, Trump reversed all of these Obama-era agreements and protections. He did all these rollbacks without really reading them or thinking about them. That was kind of interesting. Tax filing season, we were explaining what you will need to do, and of course, all those life hacks regarding getting your taxes in early. And the biggest hack really was the IRS saying that if you file electronically, then you can expect a rebate or refund if you're entitled to one within 3 weeks. Quickest way. If you do it with paper, they've got like 2 million pieces of paper at the office. That's not going to help them. We were also discussing the Beach Boys and Brian Wilson turning 80 this year, and he's going to star in this new documentary called Long Promised Road. Maybe should I wait for the documentary, Carla, or should I watch the biopic? I'll go for the biopic. Yeah, I kind of feel like sometimes you actually get, it's so weird, isn't it? You actually get a better version of the story told if you watch actors playing the characters rather than the real people talking about themselves. As crazy as that sounds. I see the White House has released a photograph of Joe Biden doing a video call with European allies over Ukraine. This was after the US warned a Russian invasion could come at any time. So that was announced about half an hour ago that Biden was like Zooming with everybody. I wouldn't want to be him. In fact, this might be interesting for you, Carla. Russian ships off of the Ireland coast are now out there. The Irish Defence Minister said the country had no power to stop it. It comes amid rising tensions over the build-up of Russia's military forces on the Ukraine border. Impartial, yeah, they're not really impartial. Ireland has a long-standing policy of military neutrality, and it's not part of the NATO military alliance. But they're going to be doing some live-fire naval exercises off the country's coast. Crazy. And then the other thing worth looking at this morning, just finally, before we have to go, because we've only got a couple of minutes left, is people deciding to ditch their smartphones. You hear about this? This was quite a good story yesterday. Yeah. It's like a whole thing now. I think it started with like one girl, and she's like, told the world. She's told her family over Christmas she was switching to an old Nokia phone so she could only receive calls and text messages. I think it's genius. Such a good idea. She said that one of the pivotal moments that led to her decision was a day at the park with her 2 boys. She was on on her cell phone in the playground with the kids, and she looked up at every single parent. There was 20. We're all looking at their phones, just scrolling away. And I thought, when did this happen? She said. Everyone is missing out on real life. I don't think you get to your deathbed and think you should have spent more time on Twitter. She's a creative at the London-based advertising agency Hell Yeah, and adds that the idea to abandon the smartphone had built up during COVID lockdown. So she plans to use the time gained from quitting her smartphone to read and sleep more. It is too much, isn't it? I mean, I don't enjoy being on my phone a lot. You know, I mean, I purposely have like a crappy phone. Like, I don't have one of those fancy phones with like 6 cameras on the back. Like, I purposely have like a slightly older phone that doesn't really do much. I don't really want to be, really want to be caught up in it too much. So maybe that's our lesson today. File your taxes electronically, get rid of your mobile phone, switch it out for an old Nokia. You must have one in the drawer. Go feed the manatees lettuce, but nothing else, and don't hug them. These are the lessons of the show. I'm Anthony Davis. Thank you for joining me. I'll be back tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Pacific. Stay with Backchannel because your pal Hal is next.